Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Science Stuff podcast. It has been a while. We took a bit of a hiatus and people were busy with everything. We finally got the guest we were trying to do at a lot of conference, which is Austin Kennedy. How are you doing, Austin?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy to be here for sure. Just looking forward to this. Thanks, Mr. Aug. Now, Ethan, for having me come out. Am I just good? Like start talking or like any questions? Huh? Nah.
Okay. The topic of today's podcast is bowling, which is why we have Austin here. You were the varsity captain, right, for bowling?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah, so we thought it'd be a great idea to bring Austin on and talk about the physics and sciences behind the sport of bowling. And of course, we have Austin and we have my co-host, Libuya.
Good, as always.
Yes. And then our very enthusiastic about bowling moderator, Mr. Aug.
That is the longest description I've had yet.
As a superlative. So Austin, you had something you wanted. What was like the first topic you had about bowling?
Okay, the first kind of like theme of like bowling that I wanted to talk about is just like the before like all my matches and everything that leads up to that. So like a popular theme that like a lot of bowlers experience, because bowling is a winter sport, you know. We leave our bowling balls in the car overnight and it's like really cold. So when we get to the bowling alley, like you're not just gonna want to throw like a frozen ball, one, just because it's like why? Like it's just uncomfortable. And also you don't want to because it also could risk the ball cracking because of the cold temperature. I don't know exactly why it would crack. I think that's something Mr. Aug would know, right?
Is that my cue to talk?
Yes.
Oh, why would a cold bowling ball crack?
Yes, when you like throw it. Is it because it's like there's more tension in or something? And then when it like, you know what I mean?
I don't know. Have you seen cold bowling balls crack?
I have. Well, like, yeah, because like it's like almost like frozen. And then you just throw it on a lane and then it'll like chip or something like that. I think it has something to do with like the tension in the bowling ball or whatever. But yeah, so what I'll do is to like prevent that is when I get to the bowling alley, I'll like take my bowling balls out of my bag and I'll just like roll them back and forth on the ground. Because okay, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that what that does is it releases some heat through thermal energy, because you know you're doing kinetic energy back and forth, blah blah blah. Thermal energy gets released and the balls end up like warming up. So like what I was noticing is that when I would throw my bowling balls after like 3 shots or whatever, that like they were just warming up. So I'm like, okay, let me see if I could just do it on the ground, and that seemed to work. So yeah, but that's a big thing for sure that I like telling people that too, because you know it's like a problem that everyone kind of like thinks about, but they don't actually do anything about, you know. But yeah, and then also some more like kind of psychology things. What I noticed is when I get to the bowling alley is how some people listen to music like to get them hyped up. Like I need to be like relaxed just because of how energetic I am. So I actually don't listen to any music before. And like that comes from just a mindset I have where music releases the neuromodulator dopamine, right? And dopamine is immediately linked to norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is ultimately like a very high energy state. It leads to high energy states. So what I do is I deprive myself of that potential dopamine through music, and then as a result, I'm more like calmed down. So yeah, those are like the big 2 things before bowling and what I like focus on. So
I think that's really interesting, especially the way you thought about how to like get in the zone kind of for bowling. I feel like that translates to a lot of different sports too. But I think it's really good that you found a way to make it your own and figure out how to make it personal and work for you. And then also, I think maybe for the bowling balls cracking, maybe the cold maybe expands materials of the bowling ball or makes them more brittle, maybe a little more fragile, so that when it makes contact with the lane or anything, it might crack. does that sound a little bit like something that could happen, Mr. Hogg?
So I will jump back in here and I will say that's not bad reasoning, except things expand when they are heated. So I would reverse that line of thinking, right? When the ball gets warmer, it gets a little bit more heated. It expands. And so therefore it's not as contracted of a material. And so maybe that would be why it's a little bit more malleable. And when I say a little bit more malleable, I don't mean a lot, because it's still a bowling ball, right? But the idea of the material properties slightly changing and affecting the rolling of the ball, sure, I would buy that. I would just say, let's flip that logic, Ethan. Otherwise, spot on, sir.
Yeah, my bad. I mixed it up. Sorry. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
No problem, Ethan. That's just strike one.
Well, is it a strike thing in this sport?
Yeah.
So
Austin almost just spit out the water that he's like, spare me these puns, Mr. Augustinski.
maybe there's more gutter ball one.
Oh.
I guess where we want to lead this next is like, I had a question for you, Austin.
What's up, Labuda?
Before your games, like how many times do you practice like just bowling, and like just in general, how many times do you practice? Do you have like a specific form that you use?
Yeah. So, okay, I was going to get into, that's like kind of a good segue into what I was going to talk about next, is like all about like the physics on why my bowling form and just bowling forms in general is the way it is. But to answer your question, oh yes. So what I'll do when I get to the bowling alley, I can't throw any practice shots until the lanes turn on, right? Because you guys have been to a bowling alley, I would imagine. Like the lights are off down the lane. If you throw it, like it's just like you're not gonna get your bowling ball back, right? So what I'll do,
I would argue though that would be the calmest state of the bowling alley, would it not? So psychologically, Austin, maybe you just roll one down the lane just to get in that zone.
Yeah, but I mean, then I think I would be in a stage of high, what's that called? The psychological term of high arousal and panic, because then I would just realize that I just lost a $270 bowling ball. That is pretty expensive.
So now you're alone in a dark bowling alley, just panicking because you lost your bowling ball.
Yes,
that's a fair point. Fair point.
My norepinephrine levels would especially be spiked, you know. But well, okay. Segueing off of where was I? Okay, where was I originally going with that? Oh yeah. So what I'll do is I'll just throw shots like without a bowling ball to just get the like. I mean, I think this is a consensus psychological term, but like the mirror neurons going, which are all about like replicating something through like doing it again and again or watching someone do it. So yeah, that's usually how I prepare. And then during the week, I go a lot again to just in a more like a societal way of saying it, to just like get in that like habit of getting the rust off. You know what I mean? Just throwing as many shots as possible, get that form down, just doing it so much that it becomes natural and the same every time. So yeah, but like off of why my bowling form is the way it is. Specifically, I lead off my bowling form, and pretty much everyone does, with a push away. You know what I mean? And that is all about getting the ball in a state of potential like free fall. It's not free fall because your obviously hands are on it, but then gravity begins acting on it and it brings the ball down for you and creates a pendulum like effect on your backswing. So you get that acceleration going into the back, and then you have it in your back, like, okay, go forward. It's hard to show without like being able to pull up the visual, but bring up the ball, and then you get in your backswing, right? And then at that top of the backswing, my big thing is I try not to force bringing the ball down. I just let gravity take control of it. And then I don't exert that force on bringing the ball down, but rather turning it into like a horizontal force and potential speed when I'm like pushing it down the lane. So that's a big part of it for sure. Those physics terms sound right there.
Force and gravity, absolutely. Yes. No, yes. What you do in an approach can have an effect on the overall outcome of the ball. And you're right that you want your force to be applied to the ball in as close to horizontal as possible, because then you're doing the most work on the ball, right? It is being the most efficient output of your force onto the ball. Can you apply force otherwise? Yes. And I think people would go, well, don't I want a higher force to like speed up along the way? In which case, yes, but I think you brought this up, Austin, you also want it to be a fluid motion. And so it's sort of a balancing act, right? That if you try to exert too much force too early, you could get sort of a jerky motion, which then throws off the release and causes some problems. So Austin, I completely agree. The physics terms you use are good. And I think you are linking it up well into, all right, how do I actually use that then to do something with it?
Thank you. I also think that like this would be a pretty cool remark to just talk about. But as you guys all know, when you go to a bowling alley, you get specific shoes, right? Which they make more money off of, but there's also a reason for that. That's not just for them to get extra money. So the thing about bowling shoes, especially when you get really nice ones, is the coefficient of friction on them gets, ice is 0, or is it 1? Is ice 0, right? The coefficient of friction on those shoes gets lower and lower. And what that does, it's for 2 reasons. 1, it doesn't leave a scuff on the lanes. So that's part of it. And also, especially when you get in like professional bowling, is these shoes with a lower coefficient like of friction, right? That's what it is. They extend the time that your foot is in contact with the ground, so you're not just sticking. And what that does is it relieves the force. This gets a whole into the whole thing of like impulse momentum, right? It relieves the magnitude of the force that ends up going onto your knees. So that's like, you'll see people that like stick a lot that don't slide, because if you watch any professional bowler, they're going to slide like probably like 6 inches or something like that. So yeah, if you don't slide, you're going to wear and tear on that knee every single time that you bowl. So that's just another interesting thing that I think applies to physics for sure.
So just to clarify, you were saying that bowling shoes, you actually want to slip and slide.
Yes.
And yes, so therefore you want a lower coefficient of friction while still not being 0, because then you wouldn't be able to push off. So there's like a delicate balance. That would be an interesting physics lab. Find the most efficient coefficient of friction for bowling shoes. Oh man.
That would be an interesting one for me, but not for all. But yeah. Also, I should probably add that you only have that slide pad, which has that lower coefficient of friction, on one foot, which is your slide foot. So if you're lefty, it's on your left foot, and then if you're righty, it's on your. No, my bad. Let me just re-say that. If you are a righty, then your slide pad is on your left foot, and then if you are a lefty, then your slide pad's on your right foot. So yeah, and then the other foot ultimately is just like any other gym shoe, because you do want to be able to transfer that energy from the ground. Ultimately, like in any other sport, whether it's baseball, basketball, you still want to be able to transfer that energy from the ground through your body and into the bowling ball. So that's why that other.
Are you saying that bowling shoes actually are 2 different types?
Yeah. So the left one has a slide pad on the front, on the heel, and on the toe.
So to tie this into the current Olympic season, kind of like curling shoes, one of them needs to be able to slide, and one of them they need to be able to push off while they're on the ice. So
yeah, that's exactly the same.
So if you watch when they're curling, you can see that one of their feet is going to slide and one of them is going to have friction. I did not realize that was true in bowling too.
Yeah, I didn't. I'm not a huge curling enthusiast, so I've never seen that one before. But like knowing it applies to bowling is definitely something that's pretty interesting. But yeah, Labuda and Ethan, do you have anything to add here? Do you want me to segue into that third section?
Well, I guess like something kind of adding on to what you were talking about. So when you're doing like your practice runs or just like bowling in general, do you have like a specific like angle of attack of where you want to aim to try and knock down all the pins?
Dude, like, it sounds like I'm paying you. You're just setting the questions up for my next part that I'm going to talk about.
The man is a pro.
I know he sees right where it's going. It's amazing. Yeah. Do you want me to answer that and get into that third part, or is there any other additional remarks?
Mm,
I have a question that we can answer like after this probably.
Okay.
I know the lanes have like a lot of oil on them. And I was just wondering, like, do previous bowlers going before you, do they like affect the path that you are gonna go on? And, like, how do you take it into account? Really?
Did I pay them both? Like, what is this? Is exactly like my next two things I'm going to talk about.
This is the quality that we bring to the Science Club podcast.
This is amazing. I don't even gotta like get an introduction, but okay. Yeah, so I'm gonna break all this down like within the next probably like 5 minutes or something. But just to paint some context, bowling lane is 60 feet long, right? And then it's 40 boards wide. So if you guys have ever been to a bowling alley, have you ever seen the arrows on the lane? Okay, so each one of those arrows signifies 5 boards. So you start on the right, have an arrow, and then you also know how they like make the triangle effect, right? Yeah, so that middle arrow is ultimately board 20, right? And then 5. So that's basically the whole basis on what bowlers use to line their shots off of. So it's like that point of reference of like, okay, let's say I was standing at 20 here and my ball, and I ended up getting it out to like 10, right? It's like, okay, that one went a little bit high. So maybe it took out the head pin rather than went in the pocket. Now I'm going to move 2 boards left, stand 22, throw at that same spot. So all those moves are all about that like same thing. But now how physics gets into that is bowling lanes, off of what Ethan said, they have oil on, right? So oil obviously is a lower coefficient of friction with the bowling ball. So what that ends up doing, so let's say you just had a very high, there's like a term for it. I forget. I think it's like actually might be magnitude. You have a very high like magnitude of oil on the lane, right? That means they're going to be very heavy, and that means that coefficient of friction is going to be very low. So that ball is going to skid, and it's not ever going to catch friction and then hook. So, and then conversely, if you have a bowling lane with like maybe no oil at all, as soon as you throw that ball down on the lane, it's just going to catch friction and hook, assuming you're putting revs on it or revolutions. But I think that should answer Ethan's question. And then how that again goes into the strategy is like, let's say someone bowled before you on that lane. Every single shot they threw, as the ball is traveling down the lane, it's carrying oil with it. It's carrying oil with it. So that's going to change the lane, obviously, how they were playing it versus how you were playing it. It's like a different lane, oil spread out different. So that means you have to tack it in different ways. So maybe this goes off of, I think what Labuda asked, maybe you got to stand a little bit more left, get the ball out more so it doesn't hide your plane through that oil more. So then it can catch friction sooner. So that's where basically all the strategy comes in terms of physics. Let me see if there was any other additional notes. And then also, I talked about this, but the magnitude of that oil is also important because like, let's say you have lanes, it's like really heavy in the middle and then it's like very light on the outside. When it does catch that friction on the outside, it's going to catch hard, a lot harder than it would. And let's say just you had a lane that was just medium all around, you know what I mean? So how hard it's going to catch is very important, and whether it's also going to catch are basically the 2 predictors of where you want to play the lane, essentially. So
that's really interesting. When you were talking about like how people going before you does affect how you'll react. I was wondering if maybe, at least I was thinking maybe that does that make bowling a little bit more of like a, because I've always seen bowling as like kind of one of those sports where it's like you can't really affect the other people going, but because of this, now it's kind of, is it kind of like more competitive in that sense? And then also, does the changing paths like affect like tournaments or big competitions?
Yes, very much so. Like you'll get to some competitions and it'll be 5 people on a lane. And when you are bowling, you bowl on 2 lanes. So it's like I take 1 shot in this left lane, I take my next shot in it. Like I have 1 frame on the left lane, 1 frame on the right frame. You know what I mean? So you ultimately have 10 people on a pair of lanes, and they break down really quick. Especially when you have people that are throwing bowling balls that have a different core. So like urethane, for example, I don't know why exactly. You may know this, but urethane especially really carries oil down the lane. So whenever you're bowling with like someone that's throwing urethane on the lane, it's just like, oh, it's like that guy. You know what I mean? Because then they spread out the oil a lot more, and you got to make a ton more adjustments, and it just makes it a lot harder on you. So yeah, do you know why urethane especially would do that?
Is urethane the type of core made out of it, or like the shell?
So I'll jump in real quick here and try to answer. From a quick Google search, it sounds like the urethane is referring to the shell of the bowling ball. Now, I don't know the full properties of urethane. My guess would be that it actually picks up oil more and pulls it down the lane. So why would that be? That would have to do with sort of the molecular structure itself of the urethane as compared to, I don't know, do you know what the other surfaces of bowling balls that could be are?
Yeah, so plastic is also another one, but I think that actually, I'm not sure. I think plastic might carry even more down the lane. I could be wrong on that, but I know for sure urethane carries a lot. And then I don't know the scientific name for all the other bowling balls, but I think it's like reactive resin is the other one that like, and those don't carry that much oil down the lane, or like they do when you have a lot of people, but like if you're just on your own lane by yourself, you're not going to really notice it. But yeah, urethane carries a lot down. And then plastic, I'm not sure. I think plastic carries more down than urethane. It's just nobody really throws plastic because it doesn't catch that friction as hard and as early as these other balls. Well, yeah, usually I think because of the way they're drilled with like an off-center core or something. I'm not huge on like the bowling drilling stuff, but yeah.
So again, quick internet search, and maybe this is something that we could spend more time or follow up on later. But it sounds like the main types are reactive resin, urethane, and I'm seeing polyester.
I think polyester might have been.
I think polyester might be what you. So I'm seeing a lot of house bowling balls are made out of polyester.
Yeah, that's what we
are,
call plastic. Yeah.
Okay, and they are non-porous, meaning right, a pore refers to almost like a tiny hole, right? So if they are non-porous, less of those, which is leading it to have slightly less friction and lead it to just more straight throws and less hooks.
Yeah, and just to add off of that, everyone, pretty much every bowler also has, so you'll have your reactive resin balls in your bowling bag or in your arsenal, as it's called. And those are the ones you throw your strike ball on. And then for your spare balls, everyone basically has a polyester ball that they use because it doesn't hook. So like if you're shooting at a 10 pin, which is that pin in the back right, like you don't want to throw a ball that's going to catch friction easily and hook, you know? So that's why like we have these like polyester balls that you can just throw. And even if you're putting the same amount of spin on them, same amount of revolutions, they're still going to hydroplane through longer than that reactive resin.
So you actually bring multiple bowling balls to a match?
Yeah, I bring 6.
So it sounds like you have a bowling ball, and then you have a lot of spare bowling balls.
I think that's the bowling joke counter. What are we at? Like 4? Just gonna keep tallying them.
Oh, there you go. You jump in. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but yeah, because and then again, it goes back to that whole principle of like what's gonna react hard, what's gonna react not as hard. And there's like 3 different types of bowling balls. Like even though they may all be reactive resin, their core is like spaced out in different ways, I think. Those are called like solids, hybrids, and pearls. Pearls are more known for like going farther but snapping harder. Solids are more known for catching earlier but not catching as hard. So those are more of like the arc is more straight, and then pearls is a lot more like violent, and then hybrid is exactly what it sounds like in the middle of those two. So yeah. There was a little bit more I have, but that's like in psychology, but like it's still like I think it's pretty interesting that you guys would. Yeah, so like earlier in my bowling season, I was like getting pretty frustrated, right? Because I wasn't producing like highest scores, not even the highest scores, what I was used to producing, right? And with this being my senior year, I'm all about all conference, making state. So that's all dependent on scores, right? And
Are you about to tell us that you had to reframe your thinking? Oh man,
no,
it only took 5 bowling puns.
Okay. I love bowling puns though. But okay. Yeah, so in a psychological sense, or also in like a neuroscience, I guess, I was like trying to be accustomed to getting that dopamine from the result. And I was like attaching it to whatever my score was going to be, right? So when I'm like producing these awards, well, not when I'm producing these awards. When I'm bowling, I'm literally just worrying about that endpoint, right? I'm not worrying about bowling. Like I'm not like this is fun. I'm just looking at that score at the end. So I was really just focused on that dopamine. And then as I started getting into the season, I'm getting like really frustrated. I'm just not having as much fun. You know what I mean? In a simplistic sense, I listened to some more neurobiology podcasts. Can I plug one real quick?
Super quick.
Well, no, I was gonna say who's neuro.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's Andrew Huberman. It's like his podcast is like Huberman Lab or something. And I ultimately decided I gotta like shift that focus and that want for dopamine from that endpoint to the actual act itself. So I'm like, you know what? I don't care what I bowl, whatever. I'm literally just gonna like bowl and have fun. And like, I know I don't really need to get into like actual neuroscience behind it, but I think that underlying, like it's true, you know what I mean? And I think putting it in like a scientific lens also gives another perspective on it. And hearing like how like the science behind it reaffirmed like why I should shift that focus, you know what I mean? So, and then I just started to bowl well, just out of like coincidence, probably because I'm not as stressed when I'm bowling. My cortisol levels aren't as high. But yeah, and that was a big thing. So like listening to that podcast and understanding more about like neuroscience and neurobiology actually ended up really helping on my bowling season, interesting enough. But I think Labuda, you had one last question.
Yeah. So since you said you just kind of like bowled, do you ever aim for like a specific pin or like I believe you said like a pocket? Because I remember looking it up once and seeing that there's like an optimum pocket that you're supposed to hit if you want like a strike. So I was just wondering if you had a specific pin or pocket that you usually aim for, or do you just bowl?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I am bowling, especially for high school, I can't really say going forward, I'm probably still going to do it just because I'm competitive. But when I am bowling, there's a lot of different things you can look at. There's actually dots by like 4 feet from like the beginning of the lane that if like next time you're at a bowling alley, you could probably look and see. But you can aim at those where you're going to throw the ball. You can also aim at the arrows, like what board at the arrows you're aiming for. So maybe that's like 14 or something, for example, or maybe it is that third arrow or whatever. Then you could also aim for pins at the end of the line. So usually I hook the ball probably like 10 boards. So I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll look at the 6 pin, and I'll be like, okay, we're gonna throw out the 6 pin because I know my ball is gonna hook those 10 boards and get into that, as Lil Buddha was talking about, that ideal entrance angle into the pocket that would give me the best chance to knock them all down. So yeah.
That's great. And that's all like super interesting. And I think it's really great that you found a way to figure out science for bowling and make it work for you to do that. And I think that's all we have for this episode. And it was a great episode. Thank you. A great one to come back from a long break. So thank you also for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Greatly appreciate it, sir.
You can always come back. And I think that's about it. So thank you guys. Thank you, Mr. Aug-inator. And we'll see you YZs later.